Welcome to the Living the Dream podcast with Curveball. If you believe, you can achieve. Welcome to the Living the Dream with Curveball podcast, a show where I interview guests that teach, motivate, and inspire. Today, we're going to be talking about post-traumatic hood disorder, as I am joined by post-traumatic hood disorder expert, King Ruler. King Ruler is from South Central Los Angeles. He knows all about post-traumatic hood disorder, as you know, he's went through a lot in his life. 2019, about 3 years ago coming up, he lost his business, his house, and his wife, and he knows all about hood drama and hood trauma. So we're going to be talking to him about what post-traumatic hood disorder is. So King Ruler, thank you so much for joining me today.
Thank you for having me, Papa.
Why don't you start off by telling everybody a little bit about yourself?
Gladly. Like you said, born and raised in South Central LA. Second oldest of four siblings, born to a lifetime county recipient household. Loved my mother, but hey, it is what it was. But that poverty played a part in the traumas that I endured growing up and my understandings of life in many aspects. But particularly, like I said, I grew up in South Central, in the height of everything you saw in colors, everything you saw in Boys in the Hood, everything you saw in Minister Society. That was how I grew up. Actually, a lot of those cats in those movies I went to school with. But I grew up in that environment, very harsh, very rough environment, no room for any weaknesses or softness whatsoever, no vulnerability whatsoever, just kind of one trauma after the other. So in that environment, I had to grow up pretty quickly. And I had to, when I say grow up, I don't mean literally grow up, but I mean like adjust the way I think and kind of adjust who I really was just to survive that environment, which means I had to become more aggressive. And later then, after leaving the hood, I got married a couple of times. And after my first marriage, I wound up going to counseling, and I wound up going to counseling for about 3 months. And I sat down with the lady and told my story about a month into the counseling session. And I realized that that was pretty much traumatic and it wasn't normal. But my question was, why wasn't it normal? Like, why is this normalized where I come from? Because I had been around a lot of places, and I had noticed that it wasn't normal in other places. It was only normal in hood environments. So I didn't connect two and two at the time. After my second marriage is when it all connected. So like you said, when I got divorced about 4 years ago, I kind of had a breakdown situation to where I had to figure out, why am I experiencing the same things over and over and over again? And I realized that it was because of how I grew up, how I was taught to be a man, even how I was taught to deal with women, how I was taught to parent. It was a lot of things that I learned in the hood that when I got into spirituality, I realized they were pretty much completely backwards. So I came up with the concept of PTHD because I know there's a lot of people that's in the same condition, the same mindset. I don't care if they're in Fortune 500 businesses, running their own businesses, married, picket fence to dog. If you came from the hood like I did, you still walking around with PTSD to some degree.
So for those who have never heard of the term or they're not aware of it, explain exactly what post-traumatic hood disorder is.
It stands for post-traumatic hood disorder. PTHD stands for post-traumatic hood disorder. And what it is actually that. It's post-traumatic hood disorders. Disorders that comes or still stays with the person even after they've left the birthplace of their traumas. So the hood is filled with traumas. And the hood is filled with ideals in life that are traumatic. like the concept that a person, like now they've come up with a concept that kind of graduated from the baby mama and baby daddy concept, which is came out the hood, of basically normalizing the fact that I can make a baby with you, but I won't marry you. I'm okay if we don't stay together. It's okay. That's a hood concept, and that's trauma because most of us didn't see it growing up in the neighborhood. Most of the people that I grew up with didn't have their fathers in the house either. I believe it's approaching now 80% of children growing up these days are growing up without the other parent. So it's getting worse and worse and worse, but it's just normalized trauma that we don't have our other parent, usually is the father. And that is traumatizing, and it definitely traumatized me growing up. So post-traumatic hood disorder is a bunch of different things that we have normalized in the neighborhood, like the rap music today, what they talk about, drugs, selling, misogyny. It's a lot of the idea of making the N word more endearing than versus what it's supposed to mean. Like these concepts are just all birthed out of the neighborhood that are traumatic, that needs to be taken down. And the only way to deal with them is to diagnose them. And post-traumatic hood disorder it's not a clinical diagnosis. I'm not a psychiatrist, none of those things, but it's my way to describe the dysfunction that comes out of that environment.
So, what causes PTHD?
In a word, trauma. Like I said, the hood is filled with trauma. The hood is not all bad. I don't want it to make it sound like it's just an absolute terrible place. I had a lot of fun growing up in the hood, but for the most part, it's a traumatic place. It's a place where death is accepted and expected. I mean, look at Tupac. Tupac thought he knew he wouldn't live until beyond 25. Most people who grow up in those environments don't expect to live beyond 25 or 30. That's not normal. Yeah, we kind of like normalize it when you're in the hood. You normalize death. You normalize violence. That's trauma, and trauma is what is the driving force of PTHD. And trauma is a very dangerous thing for a person well after they grow up and they're into their 30s and 40s. That trauma will still live inside of you until you identify it. So to answer your question, it is trauma is what causes it.
Well, how do you get rid of that trauma and get rid of PTHD?
Identify it like anything else. If you go to a doctor's appointment, the doctor has to ask you a series of questions, your background, your history, your medical history, your family's history. They have to try to diagnose what the problem could be. They can't fix a problem unless they diagnose it. So it's kind of the same thing with this. If we don't diagnose what this thing is and actually look it dead in the face and say, hey, this thing is here and it's not a good thing. It needs to go. It has ruined my career. It has ruined jobs. It has ruined families. It has ruined marriages and relationships. It has ruined me from just reaching my fullest potential. We have to identify it. As a community, as individuals, we have to identify it and call it for what it is and not sugarcoat it and not play with it. The hood will never get better unless we identify it for what it is.
Do you feel like someone moving out of the hood and or finding success will help them not have PTHD? Why not?
Absolutely not. Like I said, it really doesn't matter. Like just check out the concept of Ja Morant, right? Like the brother's 200 million strong, and he still want to be hood. Like it now, he's sitting on the sideline. Like that's how it affects you. You get married, and you don't know how to treat a woman because you've been watching Snoop Dogg rap for too long. Like you don't know how to treat a woman. You don't know how to parent because you didn't have a parent. You're basically just trying by happenstance. You don't know what to do because you've never really seen it. You don't know how to love a woman even because you probably never seen someone love your mother. Like it's a very serious thing. And that's kind of like I said, man, it's kind of like what we got to do is identify it for what it is and really just stop playing I'm so sick of the music today that justifies it. I'm so sick of these rappers today that justifies it. And nowadays, I'm so sick of the R&B singers that has their way of justifying it. It's like we get it from all angles, and it's sickening to watch, especially when you know what it is. But moving out of the neighborhood is not going to settle that issue. I don't care how much money you get. I don't care how many cars you buy. I don't care how many vacations you can take with the family a year. It doesn't matter. Like that stuff is still there. I guarantee you, to some degree, they may not know why, what's the cause of something in their life, but I guarantee you, it's rooted in that.
Well, share with the listeners how you yourself beat PTHD.
I won't say I beat it because I don't technically subscribe to the concept of completely healing something. I don't think anything completely heals. I think we learn to maintain it and manage it. But I got through it, and I began to get on the right track by just like I said, identifying it. But it wasn't until I got that divorce 4 years ago, when I told you I lost all those things, the house, the car, the wife, all that whole thing. That was when it broke me down. Like that really broke me literally down to tears. And I had to realize that I didn't know how to be a man. I didn't know what this whole life thing was about. Everything that I had learned, I had to kind of like renege on and just admit that I didn't know what I was doing and had to start from scratch all over again. And I kind of went back to counseling again, and I revisited the concept of PTHD, and I had to face those demons that I kind of had been tucking under successes in life and those things. And when I did that, when I faced them, it was hard. It's still hard every day. It's still some things that I'm still dealing with every day, but it's easier now to face them once I admitted the things that I didn't know because of the way I grew up and where I grew up. It's easier to understand who I am, and when I take all of those layers of that onion called the hood off and just see me for me, it's easier to make decisions and to be logical about my decisions versus being emotional about them, because now I know who I am. So that scenario really stripped me of everything. It took everything away from me that I could not hide anymore. And when I saw me, I had to just kind of deal with the raw me, which was tough because I had never seen me before. So it was tough. So it's every day. It's an everyday task that I continually have to build upon, because I'm technically kind of starting over, at least about a good 4 years back. I'm starting over and rebuilding who King Ruler actually is. I can't be a king until I actually admit, first of all, I don't know how to be a king, and to when I do that, then I can seek how to be a king and learn the right ways to be the king. That's why I call myself the king ruler, because I rule myself. I'm the ruler of me. I'm not saying it in the sense that I have a throne and I got all this gold and silver. That's not what the purpose is. I am the ruler of my own temple, and that's me. And until I understand who that person is, or until anybody else understand who they are, they can't rule themselves. So that's kind of the whole concept of this whole thing.
So, do you offer any coaching or training or any kind of services for people, other people who might be out there listening who might want to rid themselves of PTHD?
Yes, I do. I offer coaching for PTHD. You can go to the website called poweroveread.com. There's help there. I teach classes. I have about 30 hours of classes that I teach that breaks down all aspects of life and helps people to rediscover themselves. It's called poweroveread.com.
Okay, and spell that out for the listeners. We'll put it in the show notes too, but just spell it for them.
Power, POWEROFORI, as in igloo.com.
All right. Well, do you have any other upcoming projects that you're working on that people need to know about?
Well, we're doing the Heal the PTHD podcast. That's up and going now. We are working on some workshops for the summertime. We are really trying to gear this PTHD movement towards the kids, because with what the kids are dealing with now, especially with the bombardment of the music, is really a big thing. and I really want to try to see what I can do to shed some light on what they can do and save themselves and don't have to go down roads like we had to go down, because what they're dealing with is 10 times worse than ours, because they're getting it psychologically. So we're working on putting together a online series called Prepared Straight for youth to help with the PTHD concept for them. I will be doing some dates around. I got some tour dates I'm going to be doing in LA, and I'm going to be doing in Maryland and PG County and in Atlanta. So I'm going to be moving around, doing some seminars on this PTHD coming up in late May is what it's going to start, and it's going to kick off in LA.
Okay, so tell us about the podcast and tell us what listeners can expect when they listen to it and where they can actually listen to it.
The podcast is a conversational discussion, rather, about different topics about things that PTSD directly affects. We try to have real guests on the show, that will discuss things that they've gone through. That majority of them haven't really associated with PTSD, but it is. So it's a very informative podcast. I'm leading it, of course, right? But it's an informative podcast with real guests discussing PTSD, and then we help the guests to provide them with solutions. And each guest that comes on the show, they get an hour of free coaching, courtesy of poweroverread.com. And they can hear the podcast on matchmaker.fm. We're on that, and it will be on YouTube and everywhere else too. Those are the two areas right now that I have it running.
Okay, close us out with some final thoughts. Maybe if there's something that I forgot to touch on that you would like to talk about, or any final thoughts for the listeners, and leave us with that website once again.
Again, the website is poweroverread.com, POWEROFORI.com. In closing, I just want to say that if you want to change your life, and if you have living in a cycle that seems to be persistent, it seems to be, I want to say, destructive in your life. It's not technically beneficial for you. And if you came from the hood, I can pretty much guarantee that the hood has something to do with it. Now, the hood is not the only culprit. The hood is basically what's planted in your mind. And your mind is what's replaying what you know throughout your life, throughout your actions, throughout your words, throughout how you move throughout life. And if your program called your mind started with the hood, then you have to either reset, defrag, or rebuild it to get it right. Because until then, your mind is only going to play what it knows. So it doesn't matter, again, how much money you make. It doesn't matter, none of that stuff. Your mind gives birth to your words, and your words give birth to your reality. So if you don't shift the mind, you can't change the paradigm that you're living. So I say, if you're truly ready to get this thing changed in your life, if you may not have even ever thought about the things that we talked about tonight as a trauma to you, maybe you're seeing it now differently because you're hearing it, and you're hearing it from someone who's actually lived it, like literally lived it. So you may be hearing it for the first time and seeing it for the first time in a different light. Yeah, you may need to just go to poweroverread.com, become a member there. If you need any consultations, this is what I do. I can sit down with you before you jump into any classes and let's talk about it. But definitely, if it's not us, go to a therapist, someone professional that can get you some kind of help, because the hood trauma is very real. The things that we see, the things that we experience growing up in that environment is not supposed to happen. It doesn't happen anywhere else but the hood. But somehow they have normalized it, wrote songs about it, have soundtracks for it, and even movies about it normalizing it, making it look like it's normal, but it is not a normal thing. The Creator did not make us to behave this way and to live that way. It's time to take your power back, and you can start by going to poweroverread.com.
Well said, and that's why I wanted to have you on. So, listeners, if you know of somebody that is suffering or might be suffering from PTHD, check out King Ruler. See what he can do for you. Check out his podcast. At least let them hear this show so they can see if they want to check out his services. Like he said, he'll talk to you and see what he can do for you. See Jackson102 at cox.net for any topic or guest suggestions. Please be sure to tell a friend about the show and follow, rate, and review. King Ruler, thank you for joining me, and thank you for sharing your expertise on PTHD.
Appreciate you.
For more information on the Living the Dream podcast, visit www.djcurveball.com. Until next time, stay focused on living the dream.